I want to help organizations change the way they work. And I want to do that by bringing them a broader perspective than what they have today, because I've worked with 50 global organizations over the years, and they all have a fairly limited, some less than others, perspective of their terrain.
Welcome to Straight Talk, where we cut through the BS and get straight into real conversations with some of the best minds on the planet. I am your host, McConnell. I am blessed to be leading these extraordinary discussions and asking tough questions that then elicit insightful answers, accelerating our awareness of the biggest issues impacting our lives and the future of humanity.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Malhotra, your host at Straight Talk. Today I have a wonderful guest with me, a fantastic author, a great human being, and someone who I'm actually learning a lot from, especially in terms of the gig mindset advantage. And of course, that is what we're going to be discussing today. Jane McConnell is the author of The Gig Mindset Advantage, with the subheading, Why a Bold New Breed of Employee is Your Organization's Secret Weapon in Volatile Times. I mean, we relate to that to such an extent because we gave birth to Straight Talk during volatile times right at the beginning of COVID. And of course, in the UK where I live, we have some additional volatile experiences going on right now. And so this volatility is not going anywhere. So Jane, a warm welcome on the show today. What a pleasure to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just great, and it's an honor to be on your show. I've watched some of your episodes, and I feel like I'm in really good company with the people you've invited and with yourself and all your team people I saw on LinkedIn yesterday.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so
glad
much.
To be here.
The feelings are absolutely mutual, and let's get right into it. So when we usually start Straight Talk, all of our viewers know that we talk about the personal story. So before we jump into the book, of course, it's so important for us to know who you are, why did you write this book, and a little bit about your personal journey. So please go ahead. The ball's in your court.
Okay, well, I started my journey in life on what I call the wrong side of the road, and by that I mean that we lived as children in a house in Iowa. And it was a driveway, a long drive that went up the street, and there were people on one side and people on the other side. We were on the side of the street that was considered the country. The other side was considered the city, which meant that all those kids went to schools in the city, much, much better schools than the ones we went to just on the other side of the street. We went to country schools. And it was interesting when I think back to that, because I think I actually learned a lot. My country school had 3 rooms. It had 9 grades, 3 grades per room. And you move from one side of the room to the middle of the room to the edge of the room and then to the next room. We had outhouses, no plumbing, and it was really, really country. And what was really cool about that, Af, was that we kids were taught to take care of each other. We had to learn to direct the traffic on the road in front of the school. We had to learn to watch the little kids on the playground. And I think we learned a lot of responsibility at a very early age, because there were only 3 teachers, no one else in the school. And so that's a lot of responsibility for them, and they taught us to take part of that responsibility. So I think that's really interesting. I think it has shaped me probably in some way, who knows. Something that definitely shaped me in terms of the way I think today is a geology teacher that I had at my first year of university in Arizona, because he never gave us a lecture. He never talked to us. We had a book that we were supposed to read, materials to read, but all he did was stand up and ask questions, and he would get an answer that would lead him to another question, and he would go on for an hour, nothing but questions, truly making us think about the answers to these things. And it was my guess is, given the way things are going in the United States today, he would probably be fired by the school board. I'm serious, Af. I mean, the educational system is not in great shape in the United States. France, where I live, it's much better. But I don't think he would have been considered a teacher, really, where in fact he was a fantastic teacher. And so those were two experiences I had as a young person, relatively young, that seemed important. I got my degree from the university and then came to Paris for 1 year. And it's been 30 years now, and I've never been back. I've gone back to the United States to visit, of course. But it's fun when I talk to people in France. I say, I've been here, because I still have an accent. I speak fluent French, I read fluent French. People are amazed at my French, but I have an accent. And so they are just amazed. I'll say to people, 20, 25 years old, I say, I've been in France longer than you have. They start laughing. I tell them the year I came. I said, were you born then? And they usually say no. And so I really have I have dual nationality, but I think I also benefit a lot from that double personality of the American way of seeing things and the French way of seeing things, which is really, really different. I wrote a book called L'avantage Internet pour l'entreprise, which means you can translate that as sort of the internet edge for companies. It was published by one of the big publishers in Paris. They were just about to commission a German book to translate, and suddenly I came along with my proposal. They were really excited, and it was in 1996. And when you write a book in France today, but even back in those days, authors they're held in high esteem. And when that book came out, I was able to go and meet high-level people in many, many of the very big companies in France. And that sort of got me onto my consulting work. And that was sort of the beginning of my professional career.
Right. Can I ask you a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind, about your childhood? You talked briefly about your school. So I guess your parents and your family were in Iowa in the United States.
Yes.
And do you feel that, because I love the cross-cultural nature of your existence, and I relate to it to a large degree. Do you feel that these 30 years or, 3 decades plus in a totally different country with a different culture and a different language, and therefore, perhaps a different way of thinking that now you've inculcated into your American way of life, which is, of course, a unique advantage. Do you think that the people that you grew up with, your family members, if people are still around, you have an ability now to connect with them and relate to them at a different level? Or do you see that sort of bipartisan, sort of that divide kicking in, which is what's going on in the world these days,
Yeah, well, I must say I have a number of cousins that I never knew very well, even when I lived in the United States. And I am, to be honest, completely disconnected from them today because of their beliefs, but certain beliefs that they have, primarily religious beliefs, but also political beliefs and sort of lifestyle beliefs. It's a whole different life that I cannot pretend to love because I don't. We don't communicate very much. So that's, it's not a problem for them. They're big on that side of the family, so they're doing just fine. But your question is very interesting because it definitely, in that case, created a difference. And I don't want to get into what I think about America today, except to say that I'm very disappointed in the United States. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on, but there's a lot of changes that need to be made. And I think my cousins are sort of swept up in the part of the things that need to be changed. Now, I do know that in France, the fact that I have this American background has been an incredible advantage professionally.
Of course.
Because I have this angle that they always think America's in advance. And so they think, therefore, not only are you one of us, but you also have this edge on the way French people think. And so professionally, that's been an advantage over here.
Yeah. I totally get that because, I spent some time in France too. And I think having a hybrid background where culturally, linguistically, you have this ability to shapeshift and pretty much like a pendulum, keep moving in the direction that you feel you should be moving in, actually gets you to a point to some extent where you do become a bit of a gig mindsetter, where
that's true. Yeah.
You have this because you have the headroom and the agility and the flexibility to have the space to shape shift, right? You first have to have that space to shape shift, and language and culture, diversity of that has a huge role to play. So that's fascinating. So you decided to write this book, of course, and you published this in 2021, the nearly 200 pages of very valuable insight around this concept of the gig mindset. And of course, you're saying it's a big advantage. So, of course, I'm going to ask you the most obvious question, just for the sake of it, and it'll be easy for you, of course. What is the gig mindset in the context of this book? Because, of course, different people have different views of what a gig means these days and what the gig worker stands for. So what is the gig mindset for you, and who do you write this book for, actually?
Well, I wrote the book for people who are working, people who have a work life, primarily those who are, it started off being primarily for people who are inside companies.
Okay.
Because the gig mindset, which I made as clear as possible at the beginning, is a metaphor. It is not, I even say at the beginning of the book, it is not the gig economy.
Yeah.
It is a way of seeing things like a freelancer sees things, like a gig, not gig worker the way we imagine the Uber drivers and the pizza deliveries and that sort of thing, but true independent consultants, freelancers have a different mindset, which I've had because I've been freelance practically all of my life. And Af, I saw that come out in some of my big companies. I've worked primarily with very large organizations, and I discovered people who were doing things that were different. And they would take initiatives without asking their boss. I mean, like hiring me, sometimes would not even go through the purchasing department. And they were taking risks to accomplish something. Right. And I saw that there was this mindset inside organizations. It's turned out that a lot of people who are independent, who are freelancers, find my book helpful. Partly because I have a couple chapters dedicated to how you can develop yourself that way. So I'm no longer, after it came out in May 2021, that seems like a long time ago, but it's not that far really. And I have realized now from people's reactions that it relates and touches a lot of people. It comes from data because for 10 years, I did global surveys on the organizational digital workplace. For 10 years, a global thing, lots of people around the world who participate, 300, 400, 500 companies every year for 10 years. And I suddenly saw these freelance characteristics, employee autonomy and things like that, liberties emerging on one side of the scale, and leadership was down. Leadership was not open and participatory. That's the phrase I used. It was command and control pretty much. And so this gap was building up between people who were trying as individuals to do something and being in a context where it was difficult to achieve anything. And so that was from a data viewpoint, and it's always nice to have data that backs up when you create something like a gig mindset idea. It's very helpful to have data to back that up. And so that was what triggered it.
You talk about, this is great because I'm going to jump back and forth, of course. So
Sure.
you talk a lot about volatile times, and I think I'm going to touch on that particularly because, of course, the concept is so powerful in itself. And those of us who are already gig mindsetters will latch onto this. We'll magnetize to it. It's so easy for us to understand. And in fact, when I was reading, I haven't read the full book, but I was reading aspects of the summary and I did my homework. And I was able to absorb it at a rapid pace, at a very, very rapid pace, because I am that person. I was that person in my corporate job. I am that person as an entrepreneur. I'm that person as a philanthropist. I'm that person as a creator of different things like talk shows and so on and so forth. And so for me, it's so normal. It's just normal. It's me. However, there are many more of the other type who are not so gig in their mindset. And there are a lot of reasons for it. And we'll come to them in a moment. Tell us a little bit about the context of volatile times. Why should we care about that? And how is this accentuating the concept of gig mindset? Especially the last few years has been super volatile for all of us.
Volatile is important because people have fears. And that's one of the things that comes across in my book, which I did not realize until I got this guy. Do you know Art Kleiner?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Brilliant guy.
Exactly. He did me the honor of reading my book. Okay. And he gave me an endorsement of the book. which I have here, but I'm not going to read out loud to you. It's on my website. The main thing he put his finger on more strongly than anybody was the problem today is not a lack of gig mindset. The problem today is fear. People have fear inside organizations. And of course, there's been a lot of research done about that. And the volatility that we have today is increasing fear. People are concerned about losing their jobs. Other people in companies are concerned about how do we keep people in our company. We have like this sort of double thing, the so-called quiet quitting, and which I don't think a lot of in terms of as a term, but the whole idea of reasons that a lot of people do not want to go back to working like they used to. And it's more than just working at home and working in the office. It's much deeper than that. And I think the pandemic made all of us think about our lives, made us think about death, made us think about what are we doing with our time? Are we doing really what we want to be doing?
Right.
And I think a lot of people question the purpose in their professional lives. And I think that's had a big impact on companies hiring people, and on people on inside companies who are thinking, I've got to keep my job. I've got my kids to feed. In America, I have to have my job to have healthcare and different reasons. And so there's this constant pull of fear, but yet I'm not living my purpose that I want to live in my life. And I think that's one of the reasons that volatility is so important, and why the gig mindset, a mindset that lets you watch what's happening inside where you are, whatever your workplace is, watching what's happening outside your workplace, externally. Gig mindsetters go across borders, even inside an organization. There's so many internal barriers and borders inside an organization. Right. And then the internal external is a huge one. And that we'll talk about a little bit later, but what I'm working on right now is beyond the internal external borders, but from our company or organizational context to the entire world, and what I'm beginning to call the worldwide workplace, and how all of these companies and people, we all are interlinked together in different ways. And I think that's the way things are moving.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because that brings up my current passion for science fiction. But let's go on first with the gig mindset. If you have any, let me just tell you a really cute story. Please. In fact, I say cute, but it touched me. I was invited in 2011 to give the keynote speech to the first in Warsaw, to the first communication intranet conference in Poland, which took place in Warsaw. And I gave the keynote speech, and I talked in 2011. I was not talking about the gig mindset. I was talking about the digital workplace, how Enterprise 2 people need to come out, and so on and so on. And there was an older person in the audience at the end who raised his hand and said, "Do you believe companies should be democracies?" And there was this sort of silence in the room. And it was an interesting question, because at least a third of the audience had only been living in a democracy for a limited amount of time. Most of their work lives had not been in a democratic country. And so that question really stayed with me for a very long time. Do you want to know what my answer was? I said, not democracies, but people must be able, inside organizations, to express themselves and to influence decisions that are made. I said, in an organization, there have to be people who are responsible. They have to be responsible. You have to be accountable for certain things. And that has to connect with the opinions and the viewpoints of everyone else in the organization. So saying a democracy is a little bit too simple. Mm-hmm. But the spirit is there. But the pure democracy, no, I don't think that would work for an organization.
So let's go. Let me pull that thread for a moment, because now you've opened that domain up. So when you think about this concept of a democracy, I'm not saying that's the idea, but an ideology of some sort in an organization. Let's pick on, just for a moment, the person, the persona of the gig mindsetter, just for a moment. And I'm intrigued to try and figure out whether you've done more research on this. So if you think about the typical gig mindsetter, have you managed to figure out whether there's a certain type of profile of person before we decide to define them as a gig mindsetter? do they come from a certain background? Do they come from tough times and therefore they are more creative and adventurous? Do they come from abundance, so they don't have to worry about crabs in the bucket mentality, and they're really cool and relaxed and everything's all everything is about getting things done, and it's very expansive and so on, self-actualized to an extent in Maslow's hierarchy? The point I'm trying to make is, have we figured out, or like if I was a CEO of a large company like a big bank, I'd be pulling you, I'd be like, tell me, have you figured out what I need to look out for to have more gig workers in my business?
I have not found a personality type. In fact, it reminds me of a real estate developer in Nigeria who was in my research. And he wrote down, one of his comments was, work is life and life is work. I am a gig worker, he said to me in not very good English, because my life and my work are the same thing. It's the way I am.
Right.
And I was very struck by that. And I think that one criteria is that gig mindsetters question the status quo. They do not hesitate to raise questions about, is there another way to do it? Could we do things in a better way? And that's probably the one, if I had to choose one thing that was different about gig mindsetters and other people, that would be it. And someone said to me, and I forget what conference I was in, talking about the gig mindset, and he said, I'm looking for a job. How can I tell if the companies who are interviewing me will welcome a gig mindsetter? And I said, you'll be able to tell by how they handle your job interview, your recruitment interview. Are they interested in your thoughts and what your ideas are about what ideas you would have if they hired you?
Yeah.
Or not? Or are they just telling you about their company? And it's the same thing for a company who wants to hire people. They need to put them in situations. In fact, one of the case studies in my book, Merck does that really well. The medical affairs director, when he's looking at people to hire, he says to them, okay, we're going to create a committee and we're going to evaluate certain things about new drugs. Who do you think should be on that committee? Not people, but what functions in the company should be included?
Sure.
And he says the people who come back with just the developers and the researchers, and that's who should be included, are not the gig mindsetters that I'm looking for. They need to be saying the communication people, the HR people, the sales people, every function in the organization should be represented on that committee. So it's sort of a two-way thing. Whether you're taking a job interview or you're interviewing someone, you need to ask the questions at the beginning to find out what kind of perspective they have and the likelihood that they will be able to challenge, because that's the thing that's really hard to do. And most high-level managers don't like to be challenged, honestly. The majority don't.
Do you see, that's brilliant. I mean, do you see these gig mindsets as becoming CEOs of companies? Is that a realistic assumption?
That's a really good question that no one's ever asked me. And I would come back to you with a question and say, what size company are you thinking of?
Yeah, so let's go bold first. I'm thinking a large NASDAQ listed, the companies we know of, you named one or two of them. Do you think someone who has a gig mindset, the way you describe it, has the smarts and political savvy and can fit into the culture of the corporate, albeit that culture we think needs to change, and climb to the top one day, not tomorrow, but one day become the CEO of a company?
The gig mindset CEO has this incredibly difficult challenge to balance between thinking like a gig mindsetter when you think about a variety of things, the company, sustainability, the earth, and so on, and you have shareholders. If you're a company that has shareholders, how can you balance those two things? And I think private organizations have a much greater chance of having a gig mindsetter at the top than companies that are quoted on NASDAQ, to take your example, for the moment. Are you aware of B corporations?
Yes.
Yeah, a B corporation, they're primarily, I've seen the website, I've looked at the companies on them, they're primarily smaller organizations. And it appears that Dannon was in the process of going through that. It's one of the big companies that was on the website is going through that. But now with that guy gone, I don't know what's going to happen. There's too much pressure on money. That's one of our problems. We're in a capitalistic system where there's pressure to earn money. And there are ways that we should be earning money that don't depend on all the exploitation and so on and so on. I mean, we're not going to get into capitalism as such. But is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think it's a great perspective. And I asked the question because many of the gig mindsetters out there today and in the future who are going to pick up this book in 5 years' time, for argument's sake, regardless of age group. And you could be a gig mindsetter at 50 and have the self-awareness and realize, I read Jane's book. Actually, I'm one of them. I had never really figured this out. That's me. Yeah. Or it could be like a 20-year-old, Gen Z, who decides that, actually all of these traits are, I've always been this person, even at when I was in school, in the playground, I was a gig mindsetter. I was the guy who was selling, crisp packets for 10p less, or but I wasn't awful about it. I was like, if someone didn't have the money, I'd be like, hey dude, you can have this, pay me some other time. I was inclusive in my approach. And there are people like that. Unfortunately, I think we've never really supported or recognized or given any form of importance to people who can do what you describe as the traits of a gig mindsetter. In fact, we've gone the other end. And I keep saying this, last 3 years I've been doing this experience for me with StraightTalk has been so powerful. I can't think of another word in English, but powerful, insightful, game changing, or whatever it may be, because 100 different perspectives, 100 different intellectuals and authors and doers and leaders who actually are saying different things, but we are saying, but with so much consistency and commonality. We're actually all saying the same things, but we bring a very different lens to it. But what surprises me is that even to this date, the management books that are thrown out, and I'm not going to name any institutions, but even the old school, professors that I read when I was doing my master's or my degree and all that sort of good stuff, and leadership training, of course, because I did loads of leadership training when I was in the corporate world. A lot of that, the messaging. I mean, even Jim Collins, a great, The Last or whatever, and even Tom Pieces. I used to love Tom Pieces. Reimagine. What a book! Incredible. He had such a creative mind. A lot of people who came out of consultancies like McKinsey and so on and so forth. They did write some great books, but I think the relevancy of that material is no longer there because we are all challenging the system, aren't we?
That's right. That's exactly it. Yeah. And what's interesting, when I did my gig mindset research over the specific 9 behaviors, and then I did an age chart. And the older the people were, the more gig mindseted they were. And I was very surprised with that data. I even ran the data twice to make sure I had not made a mistake. Then I thought, of course, young people coming in to organizations or situations, they're not as sure of themselves as the older people. The older people had those traits more. But I think that if you're going to really break out of the corporate mode today, it takes a lot of courage. And I think it takes a lot of political skill.
It does.
You've got to know how to deal with other people. In fact, you could spend your whole life as a CEO or C-level person doing politics and working on bringing your ideas across. And I think you need to if you want to bring about change.
Yeah, it's getting me more and more comfortable with this idea that I'd like to express so people watching this can feel comfortable about what you've written here and your research, which is this concept of aspirations, right? I mean, until now, I asked you that question. It was a deliberate question, but who says that the pinnacle or the apex of being in a job is to be the CEO of a franchise?
Yeah.
Who says? Who decided that? At the top of the iceberg, and you could quite well and quite easily, be the play a role as a catalyst of whatever sort. In fact, you could be a quasi CEO of your own sort in whatever else and whatever you decide to pursue. But I think these job titles, this is the other issue with nomenclature in these big companies. Job titles. What is this nonsense? They haven't changed at all. You still got this vice president stuff going on, senior vice vice president. I don't understand what senior really means.
You know, I have a thing in my book about job titles, in the chapter about supporting what did I call them? The people who are bringing change in the organization, to not use job titles anymore, but have a phrase on your business card that gives an indication of what it is that you do.
Right.
Another thing I have in the book is a section on reverse leadership, where the idea is that it's not the leader at the top who is the real leader. It's often people on the edges of the organization who are in the best position to make certain strategic decisions about the organization, because they see the world as it is, not through this filter that people have at the top of organizations. But again, that's going to be a long time coming, I think.
Yeah, I also feel, I guess I'm going to ask you a question about culture in a moment, and whether you've looked at the variable that is culture and country, and to try and figure out whether, let's say you talked about, an African country a moment ago. I think was it Ghana or
Nigeria?
Nigeria, and so that's one part of the world, one continent. Then you've got Asia, and you've got Southeast Asia. So you've got places like India. That's one type of culture, and then you've got China. It's a very different type of Asian culture, and you have Japan, and then you have the West. And I say this because we've been talking a lot about this concept in the past episodes around this issue, and I guess we're dealing with it, which is split into the three spheres: East, West, and digital. Like a sandwich. Right. Yeah. And so the divides are getting greater, and we're now seeing it in the form of wars and geopolitical issues and trade policies, and it goes on and on and on. Do you feel in your research, it may not be in the book, but generally your sort of, observations, do you think that cultures moving forward over the next, let's say 10 years, 15 years, a decade out, do you think certain cultures and countries are more gig ready? And if so, why? And why I want to throw just one small bit I want to throw in. So which countries do you believe are more gig ready, if at all? But this concept of integrity I'd like to bring in, because I feel like a gig mindset isn't just about, I'm so resourceful and I'm so sharp and clever, I've got great clock speeds, but screw you and screw you and screw you in the process. I think integrity and trust and ethics has to be a core of this gig mindset or attitude, because I know gig mindsetters who don't have any of that. I know gig mindsetters.
They are focused,
not the way you define it, of course.
No, I understand that, and that's part of what when I talk about deviance and positive deviance, in that people who want to go out, I'm talking about people in an organization now who want to go out and go to conferences, meet people outside, network externally, and management thinks, oh, you're wasting your time. You're focused on yourself. You want to develop your own skills. That is deviance. They don't see the positive side of that deviance, and that they're going to bring that information and knowledge back inside the organization. And so what you talk about, I agree completely with what you said about integrity and a sense of value beyond yourself. I think that's very important. In terms of countries that are more gig mindset ready, I haven't done anything specific about that. I've had an interesting experience one year in my research. This was about the digital organization, not just the gig mindset, but with a person I met who wanted to spread it in Japan, and got like 20 or 30 companies to respond to my survey. And I gave them a special report for them. And the following year, I got back to her. She said, no, nobody wants to do it again. And I found that very interesting. Something else I find interesting is Scandinavian countries. I'm thinking in particular Denmark. I've been to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden because I've had a lot of clients there. And the first time I went and worked in those countries, I worked with Nokia when they were really, really big. And I worked with other companies. The thing I noticed, first of all, Alf, is really interesting. We had meetings. Remember, I come from a French work culture now, and people interrupt each other all the time, and no one's offended. That's just the way conversations happen. And we were having this meeting, and I forget, I think it was Nokia, maybe UPM, another big Finnish company. And I suddenly realized this meeting pace is pretty slow. And I noticed nobody would speak until the other person had finished. And it was comfortable. They were all listening to each other. And I found that, for me, it was a big change from the way things were in France. And I think that, and I've communicated with people from these countries quite a lot. I have a bold new breed, a gig mindset or Slack group where we talk about stuff. And there's a woman in there from a Danish company. She tells us stories that couldn't begin to happen in other countries that are also represented in that group. So I think the Scandinavian countries have an edge there, or at least for the moment. I think politics are changing a little bit from what I've seen in Sweden, but I think they have an edge there. I also did a specific gig mindset survey for India, which I had mentioned to you before. We had about 40, 50 companies in India who participated in it, and I traced their gig mindset profile and so on compared to the global group. And they were high on some things, low on other things. It was quite a mixed bag. And so I don't have a strong answer to your question. I don't think national culture is as important as we think it is. I think the culture that's important, I always talk about organizational culture.
Right.
Because the way an organization works, I remember going to the Nokia headquarters in Paris for a job or a thing they asked me to do. I couldn't believe it. I walked in the door and I felt like I was back in Helsinki. The way people talked, the way things looked, the way the meeting happened. And these were French people. And there was just this organizational culture that was not at all typically French. And so I think organizational culture is a strong factor.
Got it. And so let's move on to another side of this, which is very, very interesting, which is incentivization, right? So let's stick with the corporation for a moment, because I know that's an area of study for you and for me. So when you think about transformational changes in a big company, of course, there's so many layers of that. You could start in every function and have some form of major transformation. When you think about the gig mindset type person, right? Regardless of job title, regardless of whether they have a huge remit and responsibility and people managers or leaders or whoever they may be, do you find that do you believe that the way gig mindset is, and I guess other people in a company as well, I mean, you have to have everyone, right? You can't just have everyone who's a clone. I mean, there's no diversity there either. God, I don't know what would happen if we were all just gig mindsets in just one organization. Not sure. Never done it, so I don't know actually. And that's a nice experiment. Do you think the incentive structures, how people get paid and how they get compensated, tangible or intangible, also need to be re-examined? And if so, how? And what is your research taught you?
There, it's a question of getting away from individual incentives and making incentives be more team-based, and having the whole process of evaluating a person's work be a cooperative act that happens all year long, not with the official manager, but with people around the person, and making it it's a process. It becomes the natural way of working.
Right.
And, but you're right, it's a big problem, very big problem. People obviously want to get a raise, they want to get a promotion. In terms of getting promotions, we're back in the hierarchical mindset. Someone brought up, I think someone in Australia talked to me about the fact that gig mindsetters could not move up. Maybe this touches on your question a little bit. She said they can't move up in organizations because, how did she express it? They are, I can't remember her term now. I wrote about it in the book and now I can't remember it. But the idea is a gig mindset person moves around the organization almost from challenge to challenge.
Right.
And therefore does not become part of a upward movement and does not build a supporting team under her or him because they are dealing with issues, and therefore much less likely to be recognized. She said in downturn times, it's dangerous for gig mindsetters. You can easily get removed if they need to reduce headcount because they simply don't know what you're doing. And so that gets down a little bit to the idea of incentives. And I think she had a really, really good point about that.
What's fascinating is in the world today, where venture capital has increased the concentration of, in the old days, just a few startups, technology companies, then becoming multi-billion-dollar organizations, i.e., the old Microsofts or the old Apples, or even, in more recent times, Facebook was part of a more concentrated set of startups. Now, of course, that has been democratized, and there are startups all over the world, and ecosystem after ecosystem after ecosystem. That's a very positive thing, given that I'm from that background too, but I'm a convert, a corporate turned entrepreneur. And a lot of the entrepreneurs, I mean, this is a broad brush generalization. I'm not saying this is, I don't have scientific evidence to back it up yet, but I can tell you, given that I hang around with other founders and I have a whole business that studies hundreds of thousands of startups all over the world, the general makeup of a founder and some of the people they end up hiring at a certain stage or up to a certain stage of growth, which is, I would define it as, in the startup world, we call it Series A rounds, where you raise $10 million, for example, up to 10 million, and you're scaling and you're expanding and you're still like a family and you're agile and you're high-fiving, and it's like 20 people, 40, 50, I think till about 100, 150 people in the Western world. In the Eastern world, it's different because people, 100 people in the UK or US is equivalent to 1,000 people in India. Right? That's how it kind of tends to work, because it's cheaper, and actually productivity-wise, you need many more people to do the same job in a developing market. It's just the way it is, because it's hierarchical and it's command control still to a large extent.
Yes.
I find that the advent of the startup economy has given a home for gig mindsetters. It's like they feel it's their comfortable place. They're like, yeah, I'll get a job in the next startup. They don't even think about a job with a big bank or a corporate brand. They really don't. And in fact, when we chat together with my other gig mindsetters who are founders, and we're all sort of chatting about life and good times and bad times, it's almost like the signing a contract with the devil. It's like, oh, times are tough. Oh, I don't know, business is not doing so well. So what do you think? I don't know what, family, need to bring in some money. It's like the worst case scenario. And it's like, what, I've got to go and get a job. And it's not because you're going to go and get a job with another startup. You could you'd say, wow, that could be super exciting, because, another like for like exchange there. But when you think of big companies, because they end up paying a lot of money and so on, you need some comforts. It is almost like, okay.
I call that going slave.
Yeah, I'm going slave.
I have some freelance friends I know who had to go slave. I tease them about it. And others who tell me about, oh, I just quit my job and I'm starting my new business. I say, you've gone free. You've joined the other side now. Yeah. And it's like two sides. And that's not an exaggeration. It really is.
Yeah. So I mean, it is really, I don't really know what to do with it, because I have the same mindset now, and that's fine. Life's great, but it is a worrying thing, because I'm not a fan of fear. And actually what I'm creating, to some extent, let's look at it another way, is a sense of fear going into the big corporate again. And I'm not saying I should be devoid of fear, but actually, let's be honest, I am fearful of going into an environment that is not right for me. Now, that's because I'm self-aware.
Because you don't think, and it also means, and I don't want to sound negative, but it means also that you don't believe in your own capacity to change that.
Yeah. Perhaps.
And I talk about that in my book. I talk about self-efficacy, Bandura's. I don't know if you're familiar with his theories. Yes. Yeah. And he defines self-efficacy that I won't do here, but very simply, that you believe in yourself and your ability, not just in yourself, but your ability to bring change around you. A very powerful sort of 3-point statement he has made. And so maybe the fear you have is that you cannot change that context. It may be a very justified fear in that you can't change it. In which case, remember the 3 paths I have in my book? People who are advocates of the gig mindset way of working, and they're happy because they've got connections with top management. They're bringing about changes. Then you have the people who have to simply resign to that fact. Compromise, that's what I call them, because they need the money. Yeah. And then you have the people who get out, they exit. So those sort of 3 paths are important choices, very important choices. Yeah. When I started talking about the gig mindset in 2018, in a conference, I did one in Berlin and one in London and one in Paris the same year. And every time I got a reaction from the audience that I've never had in 20 years of talking to audiences. People came up to me at the end, stood in line to talk to me, saying, you are the first person to understand me. Now I understand why I have the problems I have. And
Wow.
on and on and on. I had touched the hearts and souls of a lot of people in those 3 conferences. That was all in 2018. That for me was this incredible booster. It's like a booster shot. And I
Yeah.
realized I have something here and I can help people bring about change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just to do a quick little advertisement for myself, if you don't mind, is I'm starting an initiative that I'm calling Gig Mindset Circles. It's not going yet. I'm just working on the materials for it, where it's going to be for facilitators who want to bring more of the gig mindset into their work cultures in a small organization or a large organization. They're going to go through a series of steps and questions and discussions. And it's for facilitators to help other people in the organization through that circle methodology. You meet once a week or once a month or whatever. You talk, you exchange ideas, and you build up some energy within that space, because people cannot do it on their own. And so my dream is to have like hundreds of these gig mindset circles around the world. We'll see. We'll talk again in a couple of years and we'll see if it works.
Well, you have absolutely, without question, you have all of our support from StraightTalk, because we are about trying to create this level of change, and it's not easy to create the change, but you can if you hang out with the right people. And people make change happen. That's right. And you have our full support, and we'll promote that whenever it's.
That's fantastic. I think you've got a good reach. You've got a good broad reach. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. Okay, so time runs. When we do this, time just goes like this. We've got 8 minutes left, and there are a couple of more things I just wanted to touch on. So one was, to do with the future. All right. Yes. So the future is whatever it is going to be. So we're not going to either try and predict or pontificate on what it may or may not be. When you think about your life and the incredible rich experience that you have had so far, and therefore you've written books, you've lived in different countries, you have different languages, hybrid way of thinking, almost ambidextrous existence that you have. You're a gig mindsetter, right? So what is your next decade? What would you like your next decade to look like? I'm not saying, well, I'm going to do this. So if you had a bit of a magic wand moment and I empowered you with this, you could talk about the secret weapon in this context. But so what, if I gave you a secret weapon, whatever it was, how would you define and shape your next 10 years? What do you want to do?
You mean me personally?
Yeah, you. This is all about you.
What do I want to do? I want to help organizations change the way they work. And I want to do that by bringing them a broader perspective than what they have today, because I've worked with 50 global organizations over the years, and they all have a fairly limited, some less than others, perspective of their terrain where they should be working. And that's why when we talked at the beginning about science fiction, that's why I am studying science fiction, and we need to have a session just on that. We don't have time today, but I have a number of examples here I'd like to share with you in another episode. Because science fiction looks at 10 years down the line. There are some very good works that are just 10 years down the line, and of course, much further along, but they help us, especially short stories, they help us envisage things that we couldn't imagine in the world we live in today. And I want to be the trigger or the instigator of people changing the way they see their lives, their work lives primarily. Maybe that doesn't sound very modest. Maybe I don't know how that sounds, but I'm not into this changing the leadership and organization type mode. A lot of people think you start at the top and you bring about change. A lot of books come out about that. I think that they're fine, but I don't believe that's the way change really happens. And so I want to bring life to these, what I call these, I hate to use this word because it's a hierarchical word, but the lower levels of organizations that are critical for this survival of organizations. I had an article in the Harvard Business Review at the beginning of the year. The title that they gave it was something about how gig mindsetters can help organizations thrive or something like that. And I would have said, but I mean, As a writer, you can't choose your headline in the Harvard Business Review. They choose it. I would have said how gig mindsetters can help your organization survive. I really do believe it's a survival question.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So that's what I want to put my energy into.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, you have all of our support. And yes, you're right. Science fiction is such a powerful medium. And it's an important medium for us right now because of the uncertainty and volatility around everything, frankly, in this age that we're living in. I must say, though, there is one major upside, I feel, when I talk to people like you and various others, which is, and of course, let's just talk about books for a second, because we interview authors. The idea that, and the fact that, should I say, that the new generation of authors, or past generations of authors who are writing new books, whoever it may be, and the kind of books that we see out there, the keyword searches, looking at Amazon, looking at Get Abstract, looking at you name it, I have to say that it feels better. You feel more hopeful. You feel like there's a different narrative that intellectuals and authors and researchers are wishing and willing to put out there. And it is more courageous writing than even the writing 5, 7, 10 years ago. And I spend my life analyzing dates of books and when published, what was published, when, why, how. And I've learned a lot about when topics were researched and when the books were released. And of course, it's almost, you could split it into decades and say, in that decade, we wrote a lot about CEO excellence and CEO leadership and and in this generation, we are writing about mindset, anxiety, neuropsychology, depression, new ways of working, conscious capitalism, the climate. That is beautiful because we're at the cusp of transformation. And science fiction has already, some brilliant minds, of course, who conjure that stuff up, have already envisioned a world that we can watch on TV or read books about, where you're like, wow.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. So
but
it's possible.
It's not just recent ones. A couple of my reference books come from 1948, one, and the other 1984.
Right.
And there are some very old books that have visions of, in one case, the earth was destroyed. I mean, the life was destroyed. People had to rebuild it, and how they rebuilt it and what they did. It's absolutely fascinating and has a lot of insights for us today. And I have a whole section here that we can talk about another time about how we need to listen to young people. And I recently discovered Bella Lack and her book, The Children of the Anthropocene. And Anthropocene.
Yeah.
Anthropocene. Sorry, I have trouble with that word. It's not one of my natural words.
Yeah.
And she says we are addicted to stories. They're the way we're going to save our civilization. And that's true, because a story puts an idea in your mind. And that's one of the things that I want to do in my next book, through my examination of science fiction and other sources, is put stories in people's minds, people who have the ability to change organizations.
Yeah,
I believe it can happen. I just don't think it's not going to be in 10 years.
Yeah. I hear you, and I'm with you. And I think we're together on the journey to try and make a difference somehow in our own unique ways. Yes. We've come to the end of the show, but what a fantastic conversation. It feels like I can sit down and we can chat for hours about loads of things. We're just talking about the book, but there's so much more we need to be discussing. Before we go, however, I just wanted to request and ask you for some input. How was the experience for you with us today with Straight Talk? Give us your feedback, share your experience. That would be really very valuable for us.
My experience is in two parts. The first is when we had our get to know each other last week. And interestingly enough, when you jumped in on the science fiction idea and sort of did a LinkedIn post that sounded like that would be a key thing we would talk about. In fact, we haven't, but we will, absolutely. Yeah, but because you did that, I started moving faster on my own work in science fiction. So your reaction to things I had said compelled me to move faster in what I was doing. And so that was what happened last week for me. Every week is different. And today, the interesting thing is that the conversation we're having is not at all planned. It's not scripted. It's not planned. I mean, you've thought about it and I've thought about it. And I think it's extremely valuable for me I would say, not just an author, but as a thinker and I don't know what to call myself, whatever I am, to talk with people like you. It makes a big difference to be challenged, to be asked questions. And I think I would encourage anybody that you want to put on your show to accept. In fact, as I told you, there's a guy I'm going to try to get for you. I won't mention his name now, but I haven't forgotten that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's an honor. It's a real honor, and the gift is ours, really, because and selfishly, I'm able to take all of the wisdom and the knowledge that people like you have, and somewhere it goes there. Maybe I'll have to have some search logic at some point when Elon Musk launches the Neuralink. I'll put it right at the back of my head.
Yeah, you'll be okay.
Yeah, but it was a really fantastic 1 hour with you. Thank you so much. I just want to tell the audience that. This is Straight Talk, of course. If you love what you hear and it's a value, I have to point down and say subscribe on that, press that red button on YouTube.
Yes.
And also click the notification button. I think it's up there somewhere. It's a bell. So you get alerts of the next episode, because we've got so many coming down the pipe. So with that in mind, thank you so much, Jane. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. The Gig Mindset Advantage. It was released in 2021. Go out there, buy the book, and stay in touch with Jane. So where can we go find you? How do people connect with you after the show?
The best way to connect with me is through my website, which is netjmc.com. Okay. And my email is jane@netjmc.com.
Great.
If you just do Jane McConnell Gig Mindset, you'll find me on the internet. You can connect with me that way, or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever.
Got it. Understood.
Okay, great.
It's been a real pleasure, Jane. Thank you so much. Look after yourself, and we'll catch up with you on the next show.